Welcome to the J. Scott Outdoors podcast. Today we have Connor Clark from Traders Rendezvous in Gunnison, Colorado. Connor, how you doing?
Doing good, Jay. How are you doing?
Good. I'm anxious to have you on the podcast. You know, I've got a little story about your shop there, Traders Rendezvous, there in Gunnison. Years ago, we used to hunt a bunch with my friend Steve Winery there kind of between Gunnison and Lake City. And I've been in there multiple times, and unbelievable antler display and collection there. And what you were telling me earlier is I need to get in there because it sounds like you guys got even more stuff than you did 10 or 12 years ago.
Oh, yeah. Keep buying.
Keep buying. So tell me a little bit about Traders Rendezvous and your dad opening it up, and talk to me a little bit about the business, and then we're going to dive into Colorado elk, deer, goat, and sheep.
Sweet. So my dad, his family moved here when he was about 8 years old, moved to Gunnison, Colorado. My grandpa started a bunch of businesses, owned a bunch of businesses in town, including outfitting companies, rafting companies, car lots, and where Traders Rendezvous currently was a pawn shop. So it was kind of filled with the crap you'd find in a pawn shop, bikes, TVs, the whole lot. And my dad, when he was about 23 years old, said, hey, I want to buy this. So he started making payments, buying it from my grandpa. And it's funny, we were looking at the pictures the other day, and it actually, the first pictures of the store, there's a bike rack with about 12 bikes on it, one elk head, and a pile of antlers. So it started at that. And now we've got mounts and antlers from all over the world. He's been doing it for 31 years now, so we've been in the same place for 31 years. And he's just acquired quite the collection over the years. And like I said, just keeps buying.
That's awesome. And, probably the price of antler, it fluctuates, but it's a heck of a business, especially if you guys have been in it a long time. You guys have a reputation and a name that you've built up. Do you guys go around and buy a bunch of antler, or do people mostly bring them to you and you buy them at the store?
We do a lot of both. The people that know we're here, they're the ones that are bringing the pickup loads full from all across the state. They come into the store, and if we've got a new client that says, hey, I've never sold antlers, I got a shed full or I got a pickup load full, then we'll make the trip down, bring the scale, and go out there and buy. And, yeah, like you said, it is a lucrative business for sure. I mean, it's crazy to see just the changes in the last, 4 or 5 years in antler prices and just the market, how many people are getting into it. And my dad got into it, like I said, 30 years ago, so he got into it at the right time to really acquire a collection that anybody starting nowadays would never be able to get that sort of collection. And he kind of got his name out there, so we do have a reputation in the business, which helps. But yeah, a lot of antler buyers, fly-by-night operations, opening up across the state. So it's just trying to stay competitive with them and maintain a good reputation.
Yeah, because it's like anything else. If you get the reputation for ripping people off, the word travels fast. How, as a business owner and working with your dad, how do you guys, do you have to let some deals walk out the door just because it's one of those things that, you still have to run it as a business? Yep,
absolutely. And there's people that we were talking about earlier, the Jackson Hole Antler Sale. So they go up to the Jackson Hole Antler Sale, and for you listeners that don't know what that is, it's Elk Fest, happens every year in May. We've been going there for 30 years, and the Boy Scouts pick up all the elk sheds off the National Elk Refuge, and they do an auction there. So these people will go to the auction, and they'll see, a little brown 5-point elk antler go for $35 a pound because someone wants to buy it, from the refuge. And then they come in with these unreal expectations of what kind of, prices they should get for them. But a lot of people, actually, more so than that, are very surprised. They got a little pile of antlers, 3 feet wide, and they bring it in and total it up for them and give it to them, and they're like, whoa, I didn't even know. I've had that in my shed for 4 years, and I didn't even know that I could have made money on that. So that happens more often than the other side.
I'll bet you half the wives, if the people, I have a lot of women that listen to the podcast, but if I would say all of the men put together, if they would just have their wives listen to this podcast, they'd be like, "Don't you have some antlers we can sell? Because I need a new purse." And they'd be down there.
Exactly. That's what my girlfriend's trying to do to me. She's like, "Hey, you got too many antlers." So then I end up putting them in the shed or something. I'm like, man, even though we're antler buyers, it's hard for me to get rid of my own sheds, you know.
Hey, it's kind of like fly rods, you know, or guns. You can never have enough of them.
Yep, exactly. That's what I always say about guns and antlers. Never have enough.
That's right. Well, for the listeners out there, Connor's Instagram page is Colorado Antlers. His website is coloradoantlers.com. You can also follow his personal page at Connor D. Clark. Connor, what I wanted to talk to you about is the deadline for Colorado for the big game draw is coming up April 3rd, and we've had some great guests already on talking about Colorado. But I thought it would be great to have someone like yourself, a local that's not necessarily an outfitter, but has been there, your whole life, generations of hunting family there, and know the areas and know the units well, know the state well, and can kind of give an unbiased opinion on some of the units and, maybe some trends, what you're seeing, and what have you. The first question I would ask you is, you're right there in Gunnison. You're in the Gunnison Basin, born and raised. For the listeners out there that don't know, kind of what are, when you hear the word Gunnison Basin and the units that are around Gunnison Basin, what are those units?
So the units we've got surrounding Unit 54, Unit 66, Unit 67, Unit 551, and Unit 55, and you had Louis Foles on talking about Unit 55, so I won't dive into that one too much, but those are the immediate Gunnison Basin units that I think of.
And I know, like, on mid-February, they kind of had a Gunnison Basin meeting, a game and fish meeting and what have you. What went on? I assume you probably went to that meeting. If not, you probably heard all about it. What went down at that meeting, what was discussed, and, kind of what's going on in the Gunnison Basin?
So a lot of controversy has been around a trail system called the Signal Peak Trail System. So the Gunnison Trails Committee in Gunnison is a mountain biking association, and they are trying to set up a trail system on the Signal Peak area, which is about, it's just east of Gunnison, north of Highway 50, and they've got miles and miles of roads and existing trails back there. The roads can connect you all the way to the Taylor Canyon, up to the Taylor Reservoir, over Cottonwood Pass. There's a bunch of roads back there, bunch of trails, but they are fighting to put in 26 miles of new trail, and that is in prime wintering ground. That's Signal Peak is about 2 miles as the crow flies from my parents' property where I grew up, and obviously watched deer winter there my entire life. So the Gunnison Wildlife Association, which I'm part of, has been, trying to fight the Signal Peak Trail System, and it seems like we kind of found some middle ground. They're going to put less established trails, and they're going to close it down all the way until May 1, until that shed season opens up. So it's, not quite exactly what we wanted, but it's definitely a middle ground that we can meet on for that. So that's something pretty big that's been happening in the Gunnison Basin. Other than that, it's just kind of trying to figure out the gap between the Division of Wildlife and the sportsmen, trying to get everybody on the same page. We had a pretty hard winter last year, as I'm sure you're aware, as well as like the Vail Eagle Basin up there, and we just got absolutely hammered with snow. So our deer population seemed like it took a hit at the time. Now, when I went out in May looking for sheds, I didn't find as many deadheads as I thought, but we were able to fight to reduce the deer tags last year, deer and elk tags, and I'm not sure exactly what's going to happen with that this year, but I think it may raise a little bit from the amount they gave out but still a pretty good amount of tags.
So I was able to hunt quite a bit with Steve Winery there in south of you towards Lake City, and then we had that winter kill of 2007, and it seemed like that 03, 04, 05, 06 right in there, especially I think 04, 05, 06, just tons and tons of deer, and then they had that winter kill, and I think I was able to shoot a good buck in 09. I think it was a fairly old mature deer. It was really the only one I saw. Went a little bit over 190 inches, but man, the winter kill of 07, and I'm not speaking like I'm an expert. I'm just speaking that I saw it with my own eyes as someone that lives in Arizona but hunts up there quite a bit. Man, it really wiped them out. And then we from my perspective, it really got started getting better, and I started talking to some of the locals around there, and it's starting to get better. And then we had that winter last year. Although a bunch of the sportsmen petitioned to try and lower the deer tags, do you think that there's a chance that it really didn't have the die-off that you guys were expecting, and so that there's actually probably a little bit, not surplus of deer, but surplus on top of what you kind of were hoping, meaning was it as bad as what you thought?
This winter wasn't as bad as what I thought when I went out. Now, the really big deal is we had a 99% fawn kill-off. So, I was thinking in 07, 08, storms came in December. So those late November, early December, so those deer were still kind of, coming out of the high country, making their way to their wintering grounds, and we just got dumped on. So a lot of those deer got caught up high, and the buck-to-doe ratio was so high that the bucks, just because of competition, were absolutely exhausted. I mean, you'd see a buck on the side of the road standing next to a doe, and the doe would have the snow stacking up on her back, because she has the fat reserves and the insulation, and that buck that had just been fighting and running and looking for does, he was just wet, just completely soaked. So that winter was a lot worse. So when this last winter came, it was about January, so they kind of had a chance to move down to the wintering grounds, and they seem to have done well. So now this was my thought, and when I went out this year, I saw some decent bucks, some mature bucks, but the next couple years when those fawns are we're going to have about a 2-year gap, because those that were carrying, miscarried those fawns as well as the fawn crop that was already born. So there's going to be about 2 years in there where you're not going to see that age class of deer. We went out, me and Brad Phelps, Brad Phelps, and we went out classifying deer in November this year, and in 3 days, I can't remember the exact numbers, but we saw probably 120 bucks, 4 that we would classify as mature, 180 plus, hitting that mature mark, and then we saw 2 2-point bucks.
Really?
Yep. So that just kind of gives you perspective on how that age class is really gonna hurt.
In other words, you only saw 4 that were in the mature class, and then you saw a couple of small 2 points, and then the rest, are you saying, were probably like 3-year-old type deer, just little 3 points and stuff?
Yeah,
but what you're saying is
sorry, go ahead.
What you're saying is, like, on the upper end they were hammered, and on the lower end they were hammered.
Yeah, and we saw some good bucks, but it just kind of seemed like that the age class I'm kind of talking about is anywhere from 3.5, 4.5, anywhere from a 140 to a 175 buck. We saw a lot of those, which was promising, because I figured, I didn't know if we'd lose those bucks, because my initial thought was these bucks are the ones that really have to get out there and look for does. Those big mature bucks don't have to work probably quite as hard, but I thought those younger bucks that were just running themselves ragged trying to find a doe would be the ones that bit it, but they seem just fine, and I don't know if any of the listeners have been keeping up on the winter we've had this year so far, but it's the same all across the West. We are dry, and it's initially not as bad as I thought. Now we're kind of on the opposite end, and we're looking at about a 70% snowpack of our average annual snowfall this year. I think it's going to be good for the critters. I think that they're gonna be healthy. I think we're going to get some late storms here in March and April, and kind of bring that moisture back. So I think the critters are going to fare pretty well this year.
But you are saying that we're going to have a window, say 4 years from now, there's going to be a window of bucks that's missing, a year or two of bucks that's missing, and sometimes you don't really see that until you get to 4 or 5 years from now, right? So
yep,
those 180, 190 inch bucks, or bucks that a lot of us are wanting to harvest and such, or dreaming of harvesting those bucks over 200. There's definitely, you got to watch those fawn crop years, and what you're saying is we lost a bunch of fawns last year.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, we lost about 2 years there, and the best thing to do, I mean, for anybody that wants to get out there, before a year before they think they're going to draw the tag, and Brad was the one who really introduced me to this year, was he, and Brad writes like a third grader, so that's hilarious to try and read his writing. we go around and we hike and glass and classify everything. So you got fawns, does, 2-point bucks, and then that middle buck range I was talking about, and then the mature deer. So that's just a great way, because now looking back at those numbers, we kind of have a good idea of which units are holding those mature bucks, and which units had a worse winter and things like that.
For sure, yeah, that's all good stuff to think about and to monitor, and hopefully I can get Brad on here as well and shed some light. Growing up, what would you say, just talking in general terms, if you're talking big bucks, big buck hunting in growing up out of, 66, 67, 551, 54, and 55, like, where would you say, like, unequivocally, like, that's the unit where you would go to find big bucks?
And see, I have a really hard time deciding. I hunt, the main units that I hunt are going to be 66, 67, 54. I've hunted 55, hunted 551. 551 was absolutely terrible this last year. I don't know, we kind of had a weird weather pattern in the second and third seasons when I was out, but that unit, I think it's going to take a little bit for those bucks to come back. My dad and my brother had a 551 third season tag there last year, and my dad, I mean, he's been hunting his whole life in the Gunnison Basin. He's not going to shoot a 170 deer just to shoot one, so he went through all 9 days, ended up deciding to eat his tag, and my brother killed about a 175. He's a mature buck, but he was a little 4-point with crabby front forks. But I would not recommend that unit. Now, 66 is pretty cool. There is, especially in the high country, you are so far from any road. Actually this year was my first year hunting the high country in 66. I had an elk tag there. So I did quite a bit of preseason scouting and spent about, 15 days or so up there before I killed my bull. But it was pretty eye-opening for me just because a lot of the units I've been to are fairly road accessible. And my brother and I got into a spot where we had 8 bulls, bachelor group, looked like they were in a stockable spot, and we checked the GPS, and we are 5 miles downhill from the truck, landlocked from the bottom. So we're like, got to back out. Only 2 of us, 70 degrees outside, not a good idea. But that is the cool part about 66, is you can get yourself back there. Same with 54. 54 is the West Elk Wilderness areas right there. So once you hit that West Elk Wilderness, it is just miles and miles and miles of no man's land. And same with 55. Louis kind of talked about that, I'm sure. But yeah, 55 doesn't have many roads either. 551 is very road accessible, and 67 is fairly road accessible too. But all the units, it depends on what season you want to hunt, but all 5 of those units have a pretty good amount of above timberline country, which is different than a lot of units in the state. When I looked at 44, there by Vail, those early season hunts are tough because they don't have any timberline. So those units are kind of good when those bucks start to move down to the wintering grounds. But in the 5 units in the Gunnison Basin, there's a very good progression from, anywhere from 13,000 feet to 11,000 feet all the way down on the valley floor. So it's about 8,000. But yeah, it's a very cool range. Quakies, dark timber, all the way up above timberline.
For sure. Don't you think, 44, the reason that 44, well, not the reason, but one of the reasons why 44 has some great deer and always has had great deer is it's pretty thick, and they don't get out in those opens where you can't really take advantage and glass them up like maybe you could in some of the high country of 54 or 66 where they're vulnerable, that it's too thick in 44 to really find them. It's not that they're not there, it's just you can't see them.
Yep, exactly. And you know they're there, but you won't really know they're there when you got a tag in your pocket until they're on the wintering grounds. And that's the name of the game for high country hunting. If you have a bow or a muzzleloader, you want to be able to sit there for hours and pick apart a buck or a bull, and really figure out what you want to do. So that's that tough part with 44. It's one of the easier premier units in the state to draw, just because of that reason, for those early season tags. You're looking at, if you want to draw fourth season, you're looking at 20 years of drawing for a resident. But if you want to draw as a resident archery, you're looking at 1 to 2 points.
Yeah, and it's like people think, well, man, I can draw a 44 tag with virtually no points. Well, there's a reason.
Yep, exactly.
Typically, when you're doing your research and you see stuff like that, you've got to understand that, people are so educated these days. It's not too many things slip through the cracks. I'm actually Connor, GoHunt.com Insider is a sponsor of this podcast. I'm looking at the Colorado draw odds right now, and if we're talking about Unit 44, with 1 point, it's 100% success of drawing for the archery hunt.
Yep.
And that's pretty unbelievable. Where you scroll down. Let's just go to third season here. Go to third season in 44, and you're at 21 points. So what a difference between the archery. It's crazy. You've grown up, obviously, mule deer hunting right in the heart of, some of the best mule deer hunting in the United States. Can you look back at years when, growing up, when, you would literally go probably with your dad just driving around and literally see 200-inch bucks almost every day?
Yeah, and that's it's kind of depressing when I think about it, just because, growing up here, took the mountains for granted in general. When I was looking at schools, I was, looking to go to, big schools, CU, CSU, and I ended up getting scholarship offers for football from Kearney and Western, and it was like, I just didn't appreciate the Gunnison Valley for what it was. I kind of wanted to go to Kearney, and something happened, grace of God, didn't get there, and I stuck back at Western, and so I've literally been here my entire life. Western's the university in town, for you guys that are wondering, Western State Colorado University. But yeah, I took it for granted when I was a kid. It took me till I was in my college years to really appreciate it, because I'd go out with my dad, and we'd go shed hunting, we'd go looking for bucks, and it's like there wasn't any competition, especially for shed hunting then. So it's like I didn't appreciate it for what it was. Now I'm putting in the effort. Now I'm seeing it's this big sport, and really hard to stay competitive there. And it was just life, It was something that I took for granted, and I wish I had those years back, just to be like, this is, and like you said, it was, and I don't know if it'll ever be where it was. And I'm hoping, we can get on the same page with the Division of Wildlife, because it is. It should be. We have the perfect, range from timberline to sagebrush to make this like the best deer hunting in the state. And it's they kind of need to treat it that way. They need to treat it, as a trophy unit, like the Arizona Strip or things like that. So yeah, I wish, and I look back at pictures, pictures my dad has taken, and the year right before that bad winter, he went out and was just, he passed a big buck, big 4-point. He was away for 3-4 hours, came back to go look at the buck, and he goes, you know what, I think I'm going to put a stock in that buck. Killed him, and he went 205 gross, clean typical, 4-point with eye guards, and he passed that buck because of the quality of bucks he was seeing. Now, you see that buck today, no questions asked. I mean, you've been seeing 160s every single day, no questions asked, you're going to take that buck. So that really speaks volumes to what kind of caliber bucks were here. He passed a 205 typical to potentially look for a bigger buck.
Yeah, and right now, if he saw a 205 typical, he'd probably jump out of a moving truck to get it.
Oh, yeah, he would.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit. Do you have any experience outside of the Gunnison Basin in general units? Just talking deer units that that people might be considering or should consider, or units that you've got buddies in or that you've heard good things about. Just a general overview. Any other units out there that are jumping out at you that are good quality hunts that people should be looking at for mule deer.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, kind of where I'm at in my life now is I'm not gonna wait 20 years to draw a tag. So I'm doing research to try and figure out the best unit for 3, 4, or 5 points where I can hunt consecutively and really gain that experience. So those are kind of the units I'm looking at. Outside of the Gunnison Basin, I mean, almost directly outside, a little bit to the east, a little bit south, so a little bit to the east, we've got 68, 681, 682, and Jason Carter, he's talked about hunting those quite a bit. It is not very far from Gunnison, but it's a lot different. It's not that sagey country. It's really deserty, cactus, dry grass kind of terrain. Those bucks, from what I understand, are resident bucks kind of in that wintering country. So I was out there right before that shed closure took effect. I'm out there and I'm looking at fall rubs, spring rubs down in this low country, and I'm like, you know what? I think these bucks, I think they're here. There's not much for timberline there, so I think those bucks just kind of live in that cedar desert kind of stuff. Which we don't, our wintering grounds is just sagebrush. You're not, still a little bit to the south, we've got ponderosa stands, but on most of these northern units, it's just sagebrush when you get into the wintering country. So 68, I've never hunted 68. It really intrigues me, and mostly just because it's so close to me, and it's quite a bit easier to draw than the basin units themselves. And I've also, a couple years ago, I went down to, I'm trying to look here, I think it was 751, 75, 77, somewhere in that area, somewhere in the Durango area, south of Gunnison, quite a ways south. It's about 4 hours south of Gunnison. And it was a really cool hunt, really cool country, but it's kind of the same as what you're talking about with Unit 44. It was difficult because it's so thick. Even in their wintering grounds, they've got oak brush that's so thick. You see a buck. I remember seeing a buck opening morning, and he took off into the oak brush. Never saw him again. That was probably the biggest buck I saw the whole trip. Wasn't ready, wasn't ready to, shoot him like a duck running away from me. But that unit, I think it holds some really good bucks. I've seen some really good bucks come out of there. It's around the Southern Ute Indian Reservation down there, and there's a lot of good bucks that come off the Southern Ute Indian Reservation. And that one is a little bit easier to draw. Once again, there will be some timberline, not a whole lot, and that wintering ground country is pretty difficult. You're not gonna get a very long look at a buck if you do get one. And I ended up killing a pretty decent buck on the last day. I was about to drive home, and me and my buddies decided to drive up this last road, and we're able to glass up a buck after I just said you can't glass up a buck. And make a move on them and get it done. So I think that unit's pretty cool. I also this year hunted eastern Colorado for the first time. I'm a mountain hunter, and I was like, you know what, I want to try my skill set on a new platform, see what I can do out there. That game is tough. Eastern
I was gonna
Colorado.
say, you probably felt like a fish out of water at first, did you?
Oh yeah. Because it's a different game just because, or first reason because of the private. I'm used to 90% of the lands that surround Gunnison are public. Either BLM, National Forest Service. So it was weird for me to kind of have to start reaching out to connections and say, hey, can you try and get me on a place? Can I bring you elk meat? Can I, pay a trespass fee, work on the ranch, something like that to try and get access? So that was the first part that was really weird for me, and I ended up getting access to some pretty good places there. And the second part was there's no rhyme or reason on where those bucks are. I'm used to watching that progression from timberline all the way down to wintering grounds, and this is just like wherever they can go, they're going to go. And then we had full moon, 60 degrees. This is in December. It was a late season hunt, so December 1st or December 14th. Terrible weather conditions, and it was funny because when I was leaving work, I took off all 14 days to go hunt, and I told my boss, I'm like, yeah, I'll be back in 3 days. No big deal. I thought 170s would be growing on trees out there. I'm going to whack a 190 second or third day, and I'm going to come prancing home. And it was a difficult hunt, especially with those conditions. The wind was blowing about 40, 50 miles an hour every day. So what I had to resort to was I'd just go on walks. And I would walk during the middle of the day when those bucks had bed down, and I'd walk 10 miles, and every rise that I'd pop over, I would just see what I could see. I'm used to finding sheds. If I'm out walking in wintering ground, I'm going to find a shed. So I'm there, and this guy that's a local there, I'm like, where are all the sheds? And he's like, what do you mean? And I was like, well, I've been walking 9 miles a day, and I've only found 3 sheds. And he goes, well, that's pretty good. And I'm like, oh, man, you don't even know. So that's kind of the thing. And there'll just be these depressions, these 70-foot depressions that it's not a drainage, it's just a hole in the ground, and that's kind of where those bucks like to hide out. So it was. I did feel like a fish out of water, and on day 9, I ended up killing a really nice buck. He had 6.5-inch bases, and about a 9-inch inline coming off his back fork. So it paid off, but I was getting pretty frustrated by day 9 just because I hadn't seen the caliber of bucks that I thought I was going to.
Were the deer rutting? They should have been rutting out there.
It was kind of post-rut, and I don't know if it was the weather. Okay. A lot of the bucks I saw, there was just groups of does, buck by himself, groups of does, bucks by himself, and the buck I ended up killing. It's funny, the kid who helped me out is So I met him. I was glassing a buck, and he came and talked to me, and he's like, hey, can I go out with you in the morning? And when we went out, I had this 170 buck in my sights, 150 yards, and I'm like, I just can't do it. Even though it's day 9, I'd rather just eat this tag. And then we get in the truck, driving down the road a little bit, see a doe up on the hill, and he goes, I think we should go walk up there. And I'm like, oh, my gosh, I've been walking 10 miles a day. I don't want to walk up to look at no stinking doe. And he finally convinces me. We walk up on top of the hill, and there was about 3 bucks with 20 does, and that buck that I killed was in that group. So I don't know. It seemed like they still had some rut activity going, but he was just he's probably a 8.5-year-old deer. He was an old bruiser, and ended up getting it done at 430 yards on day 9. So I was on cloud 10 after kind of going through the ups and downs of I had these.
Was he a scoring buck?
No, not at all.
No.
I'd say he'd probably go mid 170s to 180, but really just mass all the way through his tines. But he was just an old buck. You could tell he's past his prime. He's got velvet hanging off his back forks and bleach white antlers. It just looked like he was done. In the photos, he looks like just like a mule, like a literal mule. His body size was gigantic, and that was the kind of buck I was looking for. I was posting on my Instagram story the whole time, and I was like, I'm looking at a 180 class buck. That's what I want to get. And then I changed that, and I was like, okay, that's not what I mean. I want a mature deer. I don't care if he's a 29-inch wide 2-point. I want a mature deer, one who's been through it all, and that's exactly what I got. And it was just kind of kind of really good for me to feel that success after, you know, going through those ups and downs. And and being in completely new terrain in an unknown unit, it was very satisfying for me to get that done.
Don't you think those bucks out there, I mean, you're talking about body size, you know, your mountain deer that have to, you know, they have to migrate so much. I think it takes a lot out of their body. Can you weigh in on, I'm looking at this picture of this buck. Yeah, he is white antlered. Don't you think, I mean, they just don't have to put on the miles or the harshness up, you know, you know, they could be at 13,000 feet in the summer and be all the way down on the winter ground, where here they're pretty much kind of staying probably in the same area out there on the east side, I would think.
Absolutely. I mean, they not only do they have the protection of the private lands, you know, so a lot of times ranchers, they know what they have, and they're not going to let people go on and hunt, so those bucks have security being on that piece of land, you know. And then there's winter wheat crop circles and corn crop circles, and, you know, so they are fat. And it's funny because you see there's whitetails and muleys out there, and you'll see, I mean, the whitetails compared to some of the whitetails I've seen in the east are, I mean, they are monsters. They are crazy, and when you watch them run, you can actually see the fat jiggle when they run. So you know those bucks are healthy, and yeah, they're not putting in the miles the other bucks are. And I'm sure, you know, during the rut, they're moving around and getting in some miles. But yeah, it's definitely not as severe of terrain. And they are picking those, you know, after they knock down the corn, they're picking out those corn fields. And our bucks are eating sagebrush.
Big difference.
You know, yeah. So it's just there's a lot more nutrition, obviously, in those crops than there are in, you know, sagebrush and that buckbrush.
For sure. Talk a little bit about is there an established shed season now, and what's going on with that as far as let the listeners know what has been established of dates and timelines and such?
Okay, yeah, so this year they voted everything west of I-25. So the Gunnison Basin has historically, for the last, 5, 6, 7 years, something like that, had a shed season. It was March 15th, and then any time that we had a real bad winter, they'd push it back. You know, the 07, 08, May 1st. This past year was May 15th, just because of the bad winter. But they decided to do everything May 1 west of I-25. And it's kind of a terrible year to do it. I understand what they're trying to do. Shed hunting's getting too big, but you know, with just the lack of snow we have, people are getting cabin fever. They want to go out, they want to walk, and that's kind of the fight. Is CPW, obviously, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, they deal with the wildlife, so the only thing they can really control is what pertains to wildlife, which is shed antlers. Now, those shed antlers are on BLM land and National Forest land. So unless BLM and National Forest kind of follow suit and ban all recreation until May 1, which I don't think they will, then everybody can get out there, mountain bike, cross-country ski, hike with their dogs, do everything else. I mean, I could go out right now, and I wouldn't do that to myself because I can't walk by a shed, but I could go out right now and walk around and just walk by the sheds and be completely legal, which is kind of where the disconnect is between the sportsmen and the Colorado Parks and Wildlife. Is we are, you know, I wouldn't have an issue with it at all. If all recreation was banned, yes, this is going to benefit our wildlife. There's too many people that are getting out there in February pushing these deer around before they drop their antlers when they're in a really critical time, you know. So I understand the concept behind it. I'm a rule follower. I'm going to follow the rules, but it's just it's kind of a tricky situation just because of all that recreation.
Yeah, it's a tough one for sure. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about elk, and you know, what is your true love? Are you a mule deer junkie, or do you also love elk?
I love elk, but I'm a mule deer junkie through and through.
Let's talk a little bit of elk through the eyes of a mule deer junkie, and talk a little bit about the Gunnison Basin units for elk, and then we can also branch out and talk about some of the other popular units in Colorado.
Okay. So this past year, I hunted 66. That's what I was talking about. And yeah, my first time hunting high country in '66. My brother had a tag as well, so that was pretty fun. My brother guides for Jonah's Alaskan Outfitters in Alaska, and he's actually headed down.
Jonah Stewart?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
what
that's
a small world.
I know. Yeah, that's who he's guided for him for the last 3 years or something, doing Dall sheep and brown bear hunts. And then he's headed down to New Zealand in probably 3 or 4 days to guide for Lake Hawea Outfitters down there. So it was really cool for me to be able to spend time with him. You know, he's definitely he's my older brother. He's a wealth of knowledge, and he's a freaking mountain goat, man. He walks me into the ground every time. I thought thought I was some NCAA athlete, and my brother, who's shorter than me and weighs less than me, just walks me into the ground. But yeah, really cool for him to come to 66 with me. Saw some decent bulls. It's Colorado historically and still currently is not one of the premier states for elk. Yeah, there's big elk in almost every unit that surround the Gunnison Basin, but you're not going to find 3 bulls over 350 inches. You may find one that's 340, and so that was kind of our experience in '66. The biggest bull that we probably saw was 315, 320. Tried to work him in, couldn't work him in, and I ended up killing a pretty decent 5-point solo when my brother had to go guide for somebody in Gunnison. So he was only able to hunt a couple days that first week. And like I said, it was super hot, probably 70 degrees. But it was a cool unit. I did not see one single person the entire time besides my brother, and that's kind of my goal. Obviously my goal is to kill an elk, but I don't want to be bumping elbows with people on public land. So that was I really liked seeing that I spent a couple weeks up there in a tent and I wasn't seeing anybody, and it's just because not many people are willing to kind of drop into those areas where it's going to be a little hellacious to get out of there. So 66, I think that's definitely a good option. Takes about 3 years to draw as a resident. I assume probably about 5 as a non-resident. 67.
I'm looking at it right now. It's 6 points as a non-resident.
Okay. Yep. 67 is the unit to the east of 66. And it's a pretty cool unit. That's where my grandpa used to run his outfitting company, was in 67. But same thing, you're kind of going to encounter the same things as 66. Yeah, it's a little more road accessible, but you're not really going to find those huge caliber bulls that you're looking for, but I'm sure there's some in there. Same with 54, north of Gunnison, West Elk Wilderness. I find sheds sometimes on the wintering grounds that are like, whoa, that's a big bull. Never see them alive. So there are those caliber bulls. In 54, it is very easy to draw. I used to get it second choice archery when I put in for it. Now I think it just takes 0 points. You can't put in for it as second choice from what I remember. But there are some good bulls there. But again, you are going to work for it. It's not one of those hunts where you're gonna, walk up 2 miles a day. You are gonna put in your time, and you're gonna eat Mountain House and be cold and freezing and exhausted for a week before you get one down. But I definitely like 54. That's actually where I killed my biggest bull a couple years ago, solo archery, and then 551.
Let me ask you one question real fast. Let me bounce back to something you just said, that the light went off. Explain to me, and every year I have to refresh my brain, but you can apply for, let's say you apply for 61 or 76 or whatever as your first choice, and you apply for a unit as your second choice. It doesn't affect your bonus points, and that's something from Arizona it's hard for me to understand because they take your first 2 choices. But you also said something that since it's 100% draw with 0 points, it won't work for your second choice. What did I miss there?
So it's just because they kind of lessen the elk tags there. So a couple years ago, so how the system works is let's say right now I've got 4 or 5 points for elk in Colorado. So I am trying to build up those points. I'll put in for 61, 76 or something, first choice. And then my second choice doesn't take away from the points at all. So it is just, it's not an over-the-counter archery unit, so there's a lot of over-the-counter archery units that surround the Gunnison Basin, but the Gunnison Basin for archery is draw only. So you have to draw the tag, but as a second choice tag, it's not taking away from any of your points. You're still gaining that point, and you're just able to pull that tag. So 54, and I think they've moved away from that. I don't know if you can pull that up on your stat.
It says as for non-residents, it says it's 100% draw with 0 points. So would that be eligible for your second season? Let me look at the resident here. So would that, if it's 100%, can you put it in as the second choice and draw it as a non-resident?
I probably, I mean, you could try, and I could pull up the.
Okay, here as a resident, it's 100%. So in other words, if I put in for 54 as my second choice archery elk and it's 100% draw, I would draw it as my second choice, and it wouldn't affect my first choice.
Yep.
For one of the better units, right?
Exactly.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't missing something there. In other words, you can put in for anything as your second choice and have a chance to draw it, and it doesn't affect your first choice. And that goes for deer and for elk, right?
Yep. Yeah, but you have to look for the units, obviously. They're not going to give out second choice tags. They're not going to give out second choice tags in those good units. So the ones that are like those lesser units, those are the ones you kind of have to look for. And anybody who's interested, you can pull up the deer and elk statistics page on Colorado Parks and Wildlife website and kind of look at it, and it'll say, you know, this is resident, 100% zero, second choice, 10% of people draw, or 20% of people draw, or however it may be, but you can kind of look that up and see which unit you want to go into. And it's funny you say that about you not knowing Colorado's system, because this is the first year I started putting in for other states, and I'm looking at Arizona and Utah and stuff like that, and everything's so different. I mean, you get used to, you know, your own state, and then you start branching out, and it's like every system is different.
For sure. I mean, it's one of those things that you got, you know, but once you do it a year or two, then you're like, okay, now I understand the system. You were about to say 551, and then after you talk about that, let's dive into some of those, you know, 76s, 61s, 201s, 10s, and talk about anything you know about those.
Okay. So 551, it is a fairly decent unit. It is very road accessible, and I'd still say you're not just gonna go down there and kill a bull, you know, walk out of your truck and kill a bull. If it were up to me, I would look at other options for units. I live in 551 currently, and it can be fairly decent, but once again, it's kind of like most of the units in Colorado where you could luck into a nice 6-point bull, but probably the average that's getting pulled out of there is a second-year branch antler bull, first year or something like that. So I wouldn't recommend that for other people. I would try and look at some of those units that are a little less road accessible and a little better chance of drawing, and a hunt that you can do year in and year out.
Good stuff. I'm looking on your Instagram here, on your personal Instagram. I notice you're a Kuiu guy. You wear a bunch of Kuiu. You like it? Oh, yeah. I love it. And my brother's the one that got me started. It was funny because once again, hunting was just life for me. It wasn't, I used my dad's hand-me-down Walmart camo pants, crappy packs, crappy boots. So when I started, actually making money and looking into this stuff, when I got my Kuiu and some nice boots and stuff, I'm like, whoa, this is what I've been missing out on. Yeah, there's a big difference, and my Kuiu was held up really well for all my hunts this year. I bought one of the Kuiu down sleeping bags before I went to Unit 66, and that was awesome. That was a lifesaver for sure. Yeah, which one did you go with? I have the 30-degree bag. Which degree did you? I think I did how does it work? It's 0, is it 0, 15, and 30? Or 0, yeah, I think it's 0, 15, and 30. Yeah, I went with the 15. Yeah. They're great bags for sure. Okay, what do you know about, say, 76, 61s, some of those units?
So probably the unit I've been in the most is 76, just because it's so close. And I do like 76 a lot. So it backs up to 66 for those of you that don't know. 66 and 76 are divided by the Continental Divide. And once you drop into 66, like I said, no roads. 76 is fairly road accessible. So you're still going to have to put in a lot of work. My dad had an early rifle tag there last fall. And my buddies have drawn some archery tags there. My buddy Sage Hool, he killed a 315-inch bull there this year, opening day. He's super tickled with that one. And my dad had the opportunity to shoot some bulls of that class, but once again, he's been around the ring. He's not just going to shoot one to shoot one. He's really looking for that next caliber. And last day, he was able, him and my brother, I had to head back to work, but him and my brother were able to get on a bull that was about 340 right as the last light, and couldn't quite seal the deal on him. So I know there are good bulls there. Also, lots of good moose. I've never seen more moose in my life than I did in 76 that year, and some pretty good bulls. So I do like 76.
A pretty cool story about, I was in 76 once, and there was some moose down at this lake, and I decided to see how close. There were just cows and calves, and I decided to see how close I could get to them. And the calves were kind of farting around, and the female moose, the cow moose, was sticking her head down, eating stuff off the bottom, like the moths or something. She'd stick her whole head down, and every time she would, I'd run up, and then I'd stop, and she'd look around, and then she'd dunk her head back in, and I'd run up, and I ended up getting literally 15 or 20 yards from her, and the calves are just kind of looking at me. Yeah, and then she looked around, and I'm thinking, this isn't very smart, actually. I just snuck up on this sucker, and she's going to think I'm going to, want to bother her calves. And but sorry to interrupt, but I never forget that. Because every time I would come up, their water'd be dripping off her head, and she'd look around, and then she'd dunk back in, and I'd go scampering up there again. It was pretty fun.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, you're crazy. I don't know if I do that. We were one day we were in there with my dad, and we were walking around before light, and I started hearing this branches breaking coming towards us, and we couldn't quite see anything yet, but I saw this big black shadow, and it finally got light enough about 10 minutes later, and we were probably 20 yards from this bull that was pushing 2 yearling cows, and it was a big bull, and it was pretty intimidating to be that close to an animal like that, especially when you can't really see them, you can hear them, but yeah, that was a fun experience. But yeah, 76 is very cool. I can tell you that's personally where I'm saving my points for. That kind of leads into 61 that you talked about. Originally, I really wanted to hunt 61 archery. Lots of great bulls there. And my buddy Tony Ball, his cousin got a 61 early rifle tag the same year as my dad did, the 76 tag, and he killed a 335, 340 bull opening day. So definitely a great unit. The point creep is so bad, though, that I looked at it and I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to be able to draw this, especially I'm turning 25 here in a couple of days, and I want to hunt. I have the body to, really put myself through some hell, and I want to be able to hunt. So I'm not going to wait, 15 more years to draw a 61 archery tag with the creep. There's lots of good bulls there, but it's just personally not worth it to me. If you've got the points, absolutely, go for it.
I thought I was going to catch 61. I have 19 points, and a year or two ago, I thought I'm going to catch it and shoot. Now it's just racing away from me.
And
I feel like
that's for archery.
Yeah, and as a non-resident, I feel like with the new change in the Colorado regs, where you're not going to have to float the money, and you can just it's going to cause creep even more. So I'm probably going to have to shift my focus away from 61 and look at 76 or look at some of these other units. But it's it's just dang it, I thought I was going to catch it. And
I know, and it's crazy the way that worked out, because that's That I think they probably have more of those high caliber bulls than 76. But yeah, it's just for somebody that's got to build points, it's just not even worth it.
Yeah.
You kind of
tell me
about,
the story.
Oh, sorry. Go
ahead. No, you go ahead.
I was talking about the Unit 2 and 201. So a cool thing about that is they do the hybrid draw on those tags. And I don't know if you're familiar with the hybrid draw, but once you have 5 points, they give a certain percentage of the amount of tags randomly to anybody above 5 points. So Unit 2, 201 are really good units, and it's probably going to take, the same thing as 61, probably 20 years to draw an archery tag. But if you have 5 points plus, put in for that hybrid draw.
Explain the hybrid draw, because I haven't talked about it with any of the other guys. I remember talking about it last year, but I'm kind of fuzzy on the details.
Yeah, so you can look it up in the Colorado Big Game brochure, but there's certain units, and they are the premier units in the state for deer, elk, antelope, and any time that you're above 5 points, even if it takes 20 years to draw, if you are above 5 points, you have a chance to draw that tag. So if you look at some of the stat pages, it'll be like Unit 2, it'll say, 10 people drew with 20 points, or, 8 drew with 20 points, 2 drew with 19, and then 1 drew with 6. So it doesn't really add up when you look at it like that, but when you know about the hybrid draw, then you can see that person just got lucky, and he was in the same pool as the guys who had 17, 16, 15 points. He was in the same exact pool, had the same exact chance as those guys.
That's what I need to do. Thanks for the tip on that. Yep. That's what I need to do.
Yeah, that's definitely what I'm going to do as well, especially for deer and antelope.
That's awesome. All right, I know we're clicking along here pretty good. I want to take just a second to thank the sponsors of the podcast. I've talked about GoHunt.com Insider, talking about the draw odds, and I want to encourage the listeners, if you're not a GoHunt Insider member, to use the J. Scott promo code when you sign up. You're going to get a $50 GoHunt Gear Shop gift card, and it does have the best draw odds and statistics out there for all the western states. Use the J. Scott promo code. I also want to thank KUIU Ultralight Hunting. Go to KUIU, that's KUIU.com, and find out about the gear that Connor and I are talking about. KUIU makes the best ultralight hunting gear on the market today. Phonescope.com, use the JScott16 promo code. You're going to get a 10% discount there. Phonescope makes the best digiscoping adapters to be able to adapt any phone to any optic. And then the Outdoorsman's, the Optics Authority, Cody Nelson and his crew there in Arizona. Use the J. Scott promo code. You're going to get a 10% discount there at outdoorsmans.com, or call them at 1-800-291-8065. Connor, I want to, we've covered a lot of ground today. I wanted to ask you about Harold.
Okay. So
I see it on your Instagram, and he looks like a giant buck. What's the story on that bruiser?
So when I was probably a sophomore in college, and I'm there at my parents' house, and I'm still into it, but this is when I was really getting into like wildlife photography. I had my good camera, and I'd go out with my buddies, and we'd go, try and shoot them with the camera when hunting season wasn't going on. So I'm at my parents' house, and I forget I was, having dinner or something like that, and I saw this buck, and he was, a 154 point with a kicker coming off the side. And my dad's like, "Don't you dare scare that deer." And I'm like, "Dad, I got to get a picture." And he's like, "Don't do it." And he's all pissed off at me. I take my camera, I go up there, and I get some cool pictures of this buck. And I didn't know that it was going to turn into what it did. So the next year, at my parents' house, my dad sent me a photo of this nice buck in our yard, and I go, "That's him." And he goes, "No, it's not. That's not him." And I go, "Yes, it is. Look at his kickers coming off the same spot. He's gained some mass. He's gained some tine length." And he still wouldn't believe me. And I think it was November. So those sheds had been laying out, for 7 months or so. And I went and I found those sheds. So he went about 182 with the kicker. And once again, thought it was going to stop there. Next year, he comes back, and he is an absolute giant. Just a beautiful 30-inch wide, typical. And in that photo, he's very white-horned, and he's got these probably 4 or 5-inch kickers coming off each side. And I got pictures of him again that year. And I went out and I started looking once March 15th rolled around. And it was funny because it was on private land, on my parents' private land. My dad knew that I had this connection with this buck, like this was my buck, and it's at his house, but so he thinks it's his buck. But he didn't tell me. Him and my brother went out looking for those sheds. And they didn't find him, and I was pissed. I mean, I came to the house, and I'm like, are you guys serious? Like, you purposely left me in the dust to go find those sheds. So I'm all mad. I put on my pack. I start walking. I'm, like, looking at their boot tracks, and I'm like, what a bunch of assholes. I can't believe they did this to me. Right under their boot tracks, I see 3 inches of a main beam coming out of the snow. And actually, no, this is kind of the funny part. So I raised a shed dog. So I actually had my brother's dog, my shed dog, and then my lazy 11 yellow lab. But I turned around initially, and I see my brother's dog yanking something out of the sagebrush, and he will not find an antler. Well, that's what I thought. He's kind of one of these lazy dogs. And I turn around, and he's pulling one of Harold's sides out of the sagebrush, and I'm like, holy crap. And the only reason he pulled it out was because he still had blood and velvet on the tine. So that fat ass. And side note here, my brother's dog Boone. So my brother, when he was guiding in Alaska, right before he started the guide season, he went up. Had been shooting a bow for 2 months. Went up there, killed a Pope and Young caribou. Guided all season. Had it shipped back, and he couldn't save the velvet. So the antlers are just that just maroon, just full of blood.
Yeah.
So he gets them kind of stinky. They were wrapped in plastic, put it on top of the cab of the pickup. So very high. We go inside. We're having dinner. We go outside, and we see Boone munching on something. And we run out there, and Boone had jumped up on top of the hood of the truck, got on top of the cab, pulled down those caribou antlers, and eaten every single point off before I got a score. So Boone has he has a connection with those velvet antlers. So yeah, back to the story. He's pulling out this bloody antler, and I turn around and I look, and the other side's laying there. There's about 3 or 4 inches coming out of the snow, right under their boot tracks. You listeners, that's why you don't try and screw your family over. So I'm still mad at myself because I was so excited that I just went and yanked that thing out of the snow. And looking back, that had been such a cool ATL photo just because it had been really cold, so the crystals on top of the snow were really gleaming in the sunshine, and the points were coming out, and I just yanked it out of the snow. I was so excited. But ended up scoring him. He went 210 that year, and I was like, okay, that's got to be it. He's gonna get whacked. And then last winter, at my parents' house, my dad calls me and he goes, he's back. And I was like, okay. I told my girlfriend, her name is Petra. I said, Petra, grab my camera, go to the house. I'll meet you up there after work. So I run up there, and he's not scared of anything right now. He's around the house, and I'm taking photos of him, and I'm like, oh my gosh. I mean, I don't know what that buck scores, and you can probably look at the pictures, and I think he's probably similar to what he was when he was at 210. I think he was a little bigger. He kind of sprouted some extras, but gained some mass and then lost a little bit on his forks, the depth of his forks. But got some great pictures of him, and then he disappeared. One day he just disappeared. I have no idea where he went. This year he never came back, so I don't know. The saga has ended, but it was really a pleasure watching him for 4 years. Just a really cool buck, and the reason why he's named Harold is because my grandpa, who's the outfitter, he passed away last September. So it was kind of, I felt like that buck coming back was my grandpa Harold coming back. So that was the reason why he was named Harold.
Cool.
Yeah. And another funny story is that year he was the biggest. The last year that I saw him, when I told my girlfriend to grab the camera, I got back to the house that night. she falls asleep. She wakes up for work at like 5 o'clock in the morning. She falls asleep. I'm up there putting the photos on my computer, and I see this photo, and I go, oh, my gosh. And I go, Petra, I wake her up, and I'm like, this is the best wildlife photo I've ever taken in my entire life. Look at this. She rolls over, she looks at it, and she goes, yeah, I took that. And then she just rolls over and goes back to bed. And I went, no wonder I don't remember taking that photo.
Bursted your bubble?
Yep, exactly. Yeah, so now she says that's her buck and not mine.
Oh, my goodness. That is awesome.
Yeah,
that is cool. What a neat story. That's a phenomenal story.
Yep.
Well,
and so if anybody takes a look at my Instagram and notices, hey, I've got those sheds sitting in my pile, let me know, because I'll probably pay way too much money to get those.
Let's probably give you the farm for those sheds.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well,
yeah.
I want to thank you, Connor, for coming on and sharing so much with us, and I look forward to having you on again, and maybe we can get out and do some fishing. I know you love fly fishing as well, and so, yeah, I look forward to meeting you. I'll have to run down to Gunnison and see you and see Brad and Steve and all the rest of the guys,
Yep.
and yeah, it's great connecting with you, and I want to encourage everyone to go by and definitely check out the Traders Rendezvous there on the north side of, when you're coming into Gunnison from the west, it'd be on your left-hand side on Tamichi Avenue there, and definitely follow Connor's personal Instagram, Connor D. Clark, and then Colorado Antlers is your website, coloradoantlers.com. I'll link it up in the show notes of this podcast. We've got a lot more to talk about, so I want to have you on again here one of these days, and we'll chat some more. But until then, buddy, God bless you, and thanks for sharing with us.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, Jay. I'm looking forward to getting together with you and Bradley and going fishing.
Sounds good, buddy. All right, well, take care, okay?
All right, sounds good, Jay.
All right, bye.
Bye.